On today's video, you're going to see me transform our backyard with a awesome gravel walkway and a huge above ground planter box. Now, I have a starter home. If you can't tell, my backyard is teeny tiny, so this really helped to transform the space. Even if you have a small backyard or a large one, it's a very easy project. Easy in terms of being able to do it, not easy in terms of time. It takes a little bit of time, which you'll see here, but let's start out at the ground level talking about this project. Literally. So the ground, the dirt you're going to use. Now, we used a local gravel supplier in my town to supply us with a topsoil compost mix. This was insanely cheap compared to buying massive bags from the hardware store. So I would recommend that you contact your local either soil supplier, or there are gravel suppliers that carry dirt. Sometimes they have special mixes like we got, and you get a great deal. The original planter boxes that I put in had this plastic lining installed that I put in to try to separate out the dirt from the grass. It did an okay job, but that grass just wanted to get to the sunlight, and so it actually came up the side. That's something I'm going to be sure to prevent as I'm making this new planter box. Now, removing the dirt, not a ton of fun, just a lot of manual labor, but after it was all removed, I went ahead and disassembled the current planter boxes that I had. And this took a little bit of time, but I thought it was important because, let's face it, Cedar right now, it's a little bit expensive. But after setting all of that aside, I went ahead and laid out the walkway area that I was going to have. Now, this whole gravel section is going to wrap from my back fence to my front fence and up to the back patio. Now, using the string line is just going to help me to keep everything straight. I used that twine and just tied it tight, and then used a sod cutter to actually cut the sod and try to make everything look nice and pretty down that string line. Next, I grabbed a pickaxe and a flathead shovel and a wheelbarrow and took a few hours just removing the existing sod that was here. You could use a sod cutter, which really wouldn't have been a bad idea, but I don't have a pickup to put one in, so manual labor it was. Now, once this was all removed, you can see how we're just exposed to the dirt, which is great. But this is probably one of the most important steps, and I can't emphasize this enough. Your home has an existing grade. That means a drainage pattern. So the dirt is established in such a way around your home to allow the water to drain away from the house and off of your home site. You can tell that because the right side of that edge of that grass is higher than the far left side of that fence. Now, raking it all really allowed me to make sure I didn't have any divots, any high spots, and make sure that it would all still drain once I put the gravel on. Next, I identified all the sprinkler heads that were in this area and just unscrewed them, which most new homes, you can just unscrew the sprinkler heads, and then bought a little cap. These were like 50 cents from the store, very easy to install, and just went area by area and capped them all off, except one spot, which you'll see in just a minute. Then I went about selecting my border material. Now, stone's a great option for a weed barrier. It's pretty impermeable and won't let grass grow through as long as you set it up right. I'm using Blanco stone. Blanco stone's pretty cheap and readily available to us here in Texas. It does come in pre-cut sizes. So there was a 4-inch in the beginning, a 6-inch, and then this 8-inch piece. And really what I'm trying to identify here is between the dirt and the top edge of that stone is how much gravel I'm able to put in. Doesn't mean I'm going to put in that much, but along this little section that you're going to see me cutting here, this L shape, anything that touched the grass, except maybe about, 6 feet worth of space, I used a 6-inch stone. It gave me about 4 inches of gravel, but everywhere else, starting almost about here where I'm working, then along the back of the gate, along the entire run of the fence, I used an 8-inch piece. This just allowed for me to counteract that change in elevation that I had with the grade, with that drainage pattern and the way that the yard is set up, because I still wanted everything to drain, but I wanted to be sure that I used the right size stone with enough gravel in between the dirt and the top edge of that stone. Now, in all of my time getting to try to figure out and think what I wanted this planter to look like, I thought I'd be fancy and do something here with these extra corbels. I ended up not going with this, and thank God I didn't. It's not enough square footage. But what I am doing here is effectively breaking a sprinkler line. So this is the one piece that I actually left exposed on purpose because I wanted to hook up my sprinkler to a drip line to be able to run this from my irrigation system. Now, once I broke the line, it was a pretty easy fix. I just used a Sawzall, went ahead and cut that pipe evenly, sanded it down to rough up the space, put on a little bit of primer, and then took some time to just apply that PVC glue. Then I just pushed on my little angle stop with my cute little helper looking on and let it dry after it set up. Next, I went about mixing up some mortar so that I could put the mortar in that groove that I just cut in the ground and then install some stone in there, which you'll see shortly. Because I'm a precise person, I just grabbed a random mixing bowl and used it to measure out sand and mortar and throw it all in here. Now, the precise measurement is 3 to 1, 3 parts sand to 1 part mortar mix, and then you just add water accordingly. Now, concrete probably would have been a better option, but also a more expensive option because this was free for me. I had a bunch of extra sand and mortar, and so I just mixed it all up, then added water. If you look online, different people will say different things. Hey, add enough water until it's, a milkshake consistency or until it's a peanut butter consistency. The masons that I work with really get this fairly liquidy. Now, you just basically get it so that you can work with it enough. I like it to be just a little bit wetter, but this is what my mix looked like once I mixed it all up. After assembling all of my tools, my levels, my trowel, a mallet, and a foam knee pad. Yes, I used a foam knee pad because my knees are baby soft and I want to keep it that way. But I did eventually upgrade to using just some normal knee pads because I thought it looked kind of ridiculous just kneeling on this little mat. Now I'm highlighting this edge here. I made sure to select one side of the stone that was the most straight and then line up that straight edge along with the pre-cut section of sod that I have there. Setting the mortar in there, you can see that I utilize a first round of mortar as a foundation and then added extra mortar on the top so I could bed that stone in there. Now the technical term I think for adding the stone is smushing, right? You smush the stone in there, but just use the mallet. I tamped it in there, and you can see it's important for the transition between the left and the right stone to be even. At first, it was not even. The left stone was higher, or rather, the right stone was higher than the left side, so I tamped it down a little bit. Then I overdrove it a little bit too much, so I had to add some mortar back in, tamped it down a little bit more with my hand, put the level back on there. Okay, now the far right side has a gap. Now I've got to add some more mortar in there, just pick up the stone, slide the mortar under there, and this was really the process. So to make sure that every single piece was even on the transition between those two pieces just took a lot of time and effort on each individual piece. Now, not only should the transition be even, but also the left and the right edges should be even to allow just for a more uniform look throughout the whole thing. And it did take a little bit of, gentle maneuvering on every single piece just to get it all right. Once I got in a groove, it was pretty easy to do. And as you do something more and more, you become more of an expert. So this was kind of therapeutic. It was enjoyable. The transformation was pretty quick as I laid out each and every piece. And up until this point, I'd used those 6-inch pieces until that last little section you saw me there adding the 8-inch pieces. Now along the fence line, I did use the 8-inch pieces. An extra step that I added was to not only bed the mortar down as my base to secure the stone to the dirt and the ground, but then I also added just a little bit of mortar up along the underside of the fence so that grass wouldn't grow up in between the stone and the fence, and then took some time to carefully break my mallet before quickly repairing it and just tamping down the rest of those stones. Now I wanted to make a quick note here. Along my fence, I had to cut out some of the cedar pickets that were on the inside so that I could have a flush connection between the stone I was going to install there on the backside and the fence itself. I didn't want the fence to strike the stone that I was going to lay there, but before I laid these stones, I wanted to make sure that I carefully cut around the sprinkler line, which is this white water line here, and then the different wires that actually told the sprinkler zones what to do in the backyard. I did have to cut these pieces individually to size to kind of go around these and to not damage them at all. But after I did that, just took some time to clean up all the cut stone that I had, and you can see there's a good smattering of dust and mortar all along the dirt in the backyard. Now, it was important for me to not only remove all the stones, but then just re-scrape all the dirt to remove any extra mortar, any dust from the stones, any little stone pieces. This also helped me to reestablish that swale again, emphasizing the drainage pattern for the home to make sure that everything drained correctly. Then before I went about designing the planter box, I got a little angle elbow which would connect to that 1/2-inch sprinkler line, measured out how tall I wanted that line to be, and then just cut it with a safety razor. Now, this is going to be important because it will allow me to tie in this drip irrigation to the sprinkler system and get everything set up super well. So to connect that little angle to this black irrigation line, you do want to heat the end because it is super hard to manually push this on there. But heating it up a little bit will give you the ability to just press it on there, wiggle it in place, and then we get to move on to the fun part. Now, the planter box itself was going to be pretty big, 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 16 feet long. Now, to make it 2 feet deep, I used these 4x4 cedar posts and used a stop block as well just to cut multiple end pieces and then little middle pieces, which will make a little bit more sense in a minute. But after I did that, I realized I wanted to install cedar planks onto those cedar posts, and I could have just used screws and done an ugly butt joint between two planks and screwed them on there. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to challenge myself and do something I'd never done before. So I went ahead and did some research and looked into making a jig to hog out or just create a little trench where I could slide in each end plank to the cedar post and hide a lot of my screws if I used any, make it a little bit easier to glue up, and also, like I mentioned earlier, just easier to assemble. This really wasn't that hard. It took me probably, 15-20 minutes to put together. I did add some extra end pieces of MDF just to really lock that cedar post in there. And then, of course, just use some additional screws. I countersunk some holes to allow those screws to hold the cedar post in place with that little jig. You're not going to see these screws because of the way I ended up staining it. With everything now secured, I took small little passes each and every time to slowly route out and hog out that channel to slide those planks into. This is probably the most enjoyable thing that I did on this whole project. It went incredibly fast, but it was still something that was pretty satisfying to do. So would definitely recommend it, although of course you've got to be careful with a router. After all that, I set up another stop block on my miter saw stand, cutting 4-foot long cedar plank sections. Now, the fun part. You want to do this? Yeah, didn't think so. I sanded for hours of my life to get these pieces exactly the way they wanted to. I did bring them down to, I think, 120 grit, which is probably overkill for an exterior wood piece, but I've got little kids and I didn't want my girls getting splinters in their fingers, or frankly, me getting splinters in my fingers doing this. Now, I did not put in here the hours that I took to sand, but also I didn't put in here the staining that I did for these planters. I used a food grade level stain that is actually, it's organic, and it was a very cheap buy on Amazon. I'll try to find that link and put it in here just so you can see exactly what I did. But once I put some glue on there, spread it around, and clamped everything in, making sure to clamp those end pieces because cedar will warp. It'll shrink, it'll move around. So I was sure to use my mallet, tamp everything in place so it would dry well. Once everything dried, I went and I grabbed my track saw. Yeah, I don't have a track saw. So I used the poor man's track saw, which is a piece of MDF. This is extremely cheap to do. MDF is very inexpensive, but what's great about it is even on all four sides. So as long as you make your measurements correctly and you line up your piece correctly and you use your clamps just to hold that piece on there, you can get straight lines very, very easily. After gluing all these pieces up and then trimming them to size, I went ahead and moved to the backyard to glue everything together. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire glue up process because it was extremely repetitive, like a lot of things in this project, but I did use an excessive amount of Type Bond 3 since this is exterior, and then I was very worried about this pulling apart, so I did put glue on almost every single surface that could receive glue, and then use my brute and manly strength, or a mallet, just to tamp the piece into that groove and channel. I had to do this carefully on each and every piece. Once I did that, then I would just use a clamp and clamp using those end posts together just to dry everything out. Once everything was dried, I then used a screw and just a 3-inch exterior decking screw and drove them through the inside of the post, through that little end piece for the plank, and this would help to just add a little bit of additional strength. Now, you're never going to see these screws because it's going to be covered by dirt and the foliage. Ooh, nice use of the word foliage, but it's going to be covered with foliage from all of the different plants that are growing in the box. So I use a countersink bit, then use an 1/8 inch drill bit to drill the length of that hole, and then sunk multiple screws. I probably use 6 to 8 exterior screws for every single post just to secure all those planks. And I really wanted to be sure to do so because I knew the sheer volume of dirt that I was adding back in would push out on that box. So to prevent that from happening, I put these little cedar posts down. You can see that are touching that stone and touching the box. This just added a little bit of additional strength. So as I added each of those bags there with my beautiful little helpers, it allowed me to maintain uniformity on that box. Whenever I installed the weed barrier and the gravel, I just went ahead and removed those cedar pieces on the ground. Now, I know that I'm contradicting myself a little bit here because I said, don't buy bags of soil from the store. The reason I had to actually do that to finish out this project was, although I had so much dirt from the original box, I still had to get some extra dirt, and the amount of dirt I needed to get was not enough for the soil company to justify a shipment to my house. So sadly, I had to lug all those bags into my backyard and then empty them out. After I spread out all that dirt evenly, I went about locating that sprinkler line that I had designated for the drip irrigation system for the planter box. I would highly recommend, if you are able to do something like this, that you install a drip system onto your original irrigation system, because then you don't have to water it every day by hand and it will save you a ton of time. Next, I filled in all of my joints between those stones with some buff mortar, and then once the mortar dried, I went ahead and took a masonry bit, drilling a hole into those joints, and then installing just a small piece of drain line. You should do this. Highly, highly recommend, to allow any water that gets into the gravel bed to still be able to seep out and flow out and follow that drainage pattern, which we've worked so hard to maintain up to this point. And again, even maintaining that drainage pattern, I had to add some additional grade sand, which you can see me walking on here on this little section. So it's just very important to drill all those holes and then take a little piece of that tubing, stick it in the hole, and go from there. Then I grabbed a massive roll of weed barrier and started to roll it all out. Thankfully, I was not alone, and one of my awesome assistants brought a speaker with some music and was jamming with me as I was rolling everything out. Depending on how wide that little section was, I did have to double up some of these pieces just to give myself enough width. We did decide to go ahead and plant plants during planting season to allow those plants enough time to grow in the planter box. How many times have I said plant in this video? Good Lord. Okay, after I put all that along the side of the planter box and the adjacent side as well, I then moved to the bay window that was directly in front of my master bedroom. Again, just overlapping the pieces where needed. You can cut this pretty easily with a pair of scissors, and then I just used some landscaping stakes to then stake all of those pieces into the ground just to hold the weed barrier in place. The gravel we chose to use for our backyard is decomposed granite, and whenever the truck pulled up, I was super excited to get it all into the backyard, but not excited to move it. It probably took me, I know it took me until 3 in the morning to get all this done, but it was well worth it. I actually ended up getting another shipment of gravel because originally what I ordered wasn't enough. When it was all said and done, I think it's in between 7 and 8 yards of gravel, which is a heck of a lot. But in the end, it definitely was worth it. Now, don't worry, I didn't waste your time showing me unloading all this gravel, but it's time for the big reveal. Now, as soon as you enter into my backyard, this is the first view you get. I love how everything just draws your eye to the planter box in the backyard, and then you get a great color contrast between that green popping out of the planter box, even a little bit of green from the grass, and the reds and oranges from the cedar box itself, the reds from that gravel on the ground. It just looked awesome, and it really elevated the backyard and made it an even more enjoyable place to be. I really hope that you liked today's video. If you did, give me a comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.